As I've mentioned in previous videos, I am on the pursuit of trying to get all of my consoles to have a wireless control option. At this point, there's only a handful of them left that I still need to do that with. I think actually only two, both of them being Sega consoles, the Master System and the Saturn. But thanks to 8BitDo, I now only have one left to get. But we're not talking about that journey I'm taking today. We're going to be talking about this. This is their retro receiver for the Sega Saturn. And if it works as well as 8BitDo's history with these retro receivers says it will, I only have one left to get after this. Let's show you what little unboxing there is. We'll talk a bit about the build of it, and we'll test it out with a bunch of different controllers to see how it handles and how it behaves. So let's adjust the view and we'll get this guy opened and set up. All right, let's do it. So as I've said, the unboxing for this is going to be pretty lackluster, because they always are. You've got your USB-C to USB-A cable for updating the firmware and attaching it to your computer. Here's our guy, and then the box is empty, so we can just ignore that now. But there is our guy. As 8BitDo tends to do, the design language to try and mimic the actual plug of the original controller is here. You've got the general shape is the same. It's got these 9 dimples in it on both of them. And the two biggest differences are this portion here, where the cable would come in on the original Saturn controller. It's a bit shorter, and that's where our pair button is. And the biggest difference is actually here on the connector itself. On the Saturn controller, it's actually a metal plug. And on the 8BitDo one, the plug itself is plastic. It's still got the connectors inside of it, just like the Saturn controller does. But it is a plastic plug itself. I'm going to say that that's probably good, because it means that any extra pressure or anything that you have to apply to get this guy into the console is going to wear down this instead of the console itself, because one of these is a lot easier to replace than a controller port on the console. The build quality is pretty well up to 8BitDo standards. I do feel like this here, I understand it has to be, but this just feels a little thin. It's got a little bit of flex to it on the plug itself, which again, it kind of has to be, because it has to fit in the controller port, and it has to give you enough room here for whatever contacts inside the console are going to be connected in here. So unfortunately, that's just the way it had to be, but it just note it feels a little thin there, so don't grab it by the plug and wave it and start throwing it around or something. Outside of that, the build is very sturdy. There's no flex into it anywhere else. So where the 8BitDo logo is the top. On the top here, you have your LED indicator light is in this little arrow right here. On the front of it is your pair button, and on the, what I guess would be the right side of it, is your Type-C port. This will be used with the included cable to connect it to your computer to update the firmware, and again, like I mentioned, to use this as a Bluetooth receiver for your computer if your computer does not have a Bluetooth card in it. As far as fitting into the console itself, it does feel like it will have no problem, as it feels pretty much identically the same size as the original Sega port. I have to say, I'm not big on this color for this. I understand like the color doesn't really matter, but if they wanted to fit more in the design language of it, I feel like they should have gone with the black like the Sega Saturn controller port was, or whatever plastic they used for the Genesis one. It was a little lighter than black, but it wasn't this like 80s gray kind of vibe. The color of it is like the least important part of it though, so who cares? But I think that's all I really have to say about it. Let's make sure the firmware is up to date on it, and then we will get it plugged in and see how it works with a bunch of different controllers. So in order to update this guy's firmware, you need 8BitDo's Ultimate Software V2, which luckily they have recently released a Mac version for. It's a little janky, but it does work. You'll just take the guy, you'll plug it in. You don't actually have to hold the button anymore. You can just plug it in, and it will recognize that there is something plugged into it. And then you'll just try The thing tried to pull it away. And then you'll just hit this update button and you will be able to update it to the most recent firmware. As you can see, I have the most recent firmware on it. It does not ship with the current firmware on it. So you do need to update this firmware before you use it if you can. Luckily though, they have this option for Mac. They have a Windows version of it, so you should be good to go regardless of what computer you own. Alrighty, so the way to get this guy to pair up is the same as all the others. So when you turn the console on, you're going to see this light is going to start flashing. To put it into pairing mode, you're going to press the button one time. It's going to start flashing really quickly like this. And then you're going to take whatever controller you want to pair to it. You're going to want to put it into pairing mode. And then, with enough time, they'll find each other, they'll both stop flashing, and you are good to go. So now, we're going to change the view. I'm not going to be able to use my microphone for this next little bit, but we're going to plug in we're going to pair it with a bunch of different controllers and see how they behave and make sure that they're going to work how you expect them to. We're going to change over now to a DualSense controller and see if this is going to work for us. That hit basically immediately. Now, if I had to hazard a guess, it's hard to say whenever I don't actually have anything to test it with, but these, your square, X, and circle button all behave like your A, B, and C. So it's probably square is A, X is B, and circle is C. And I would guess that your two triggers and your triangle button are your X, Y, and Z buttons, if I had to guess. So I would assume that those are acting as like the shoulder buttons on the Saturn, which is cool. It does work, but it does work. I just don't know if this would be the controller you'd want to use for this. I've now got an Xbox Series controller that loaded up basically immediately, and you have your same situation. Your X, A, and B buttons are behaving like the A, B, and C buttons, and your triggers are your L and R buttons. So I can only assume that L1, and I guess in this it's LB, RB, and Y are your X, Y, and Z buttons. Okay, I went and grabbed a Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Get that into pairing mode. That was found basically immediately. And this behaves the exact same way. There is one very important thing I think I should note here. I actually do have one of the Saturn 3D control pads, and I do believe that the 8BitDo dongle does not treat the sticks as analog. It just treats them as an 8-directional digital input. Because I've got a lot more control with this than I feel like I had with the 8BitDo. Something to keep in mind, if you're buying this adapter to specifically play nights, you're not going to get as good of control as you would with this guy. Let me just pull it back over and see just to make sure, because now I'm curious. All right, I got my Switch Pro controller back plugged in. Nah, see how choppy that is? See how choppy the movement is? And it's pure it's 8 directions. Yeah, there's no finesse to that movement. It is just the 8 directions, whereas the 3D control pad gave me proper analog control. So just something to keep in mind. From my understanding, not a lot of Saturn games actually properly utilize this thing, but if this is the reason that you're wanting this guy, you're not going to get proper analog control. But the real reason you would want to get something like this is probably for 8BitDo's M30 controller. And I feel like this is going to work without a problem because they're both 8BitDo products, but let's just double check and make sure. There we go. I'm really going to need to look up how to actually play nights, like what the purpose is and how you progress in the game, because I can just fly around and collect stuff all day, but that's not actually getting me anywhere, you know? But yeah, that works. That works really well. So yeah, that's a decent little piece of kit right there. It is a little bit of a shame that the analog sticks on controllers don't seem to work with it. I feel like that's something that they could have worked out and made it work, but Maybe in a future firmware update, that's something that they'll add. And who knows, maybe it's just the way I had things set up, it might not have worked. But as far as I can tell, it is meant to just mimic a regular Sega Saturn controller and not the 3D pad, which for most games, that's not going to be an issue. Just keep that in mind if you were looking at this with the idea of getting it for the analog games. But yeah, if you want it, it's about 25 bucks, and I'll drop an affiliate link down in the description below so you can go pick it up. But I think that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I do here, hit subscribe because that helps me out a lot. But again, I want to thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, y'all.